Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange turns 50 years old this winter. An adaptation of Anthony Burgess's 1962 novel of the same name, A Clockwork Orange is considered by many to be one of the worst films to come from one of the most celebrated filmmakers to ever live. Few of Kubrick's movies have remained so controversial in the years since their release, as even today it remains relevant in the ongoing debate surrounding violence and how it's depicted in our media. So what is it about A Clockwork Orange that has us still talking about it, even now, 50 years later? Coming off the success of his most expensive and ambitious film yet, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick began working on what would become his lowest budget film. While working on Dr. Strangelove, screenwriter Terry Southern gave Kubrick a copy of A Clockwork Orange, but it wasn't until a couple years later that Kubrick actually got a chance to read it, and nearly a decade later he'd decide to adapt it to film. Clockwork was to be a small movie sandwiched between two epics, 2001 before it and Kubrick's famously never-made Napoleon film after it. His decision to adapt A Clockwork Orange had been in part because 2001 had been so expensive, and Kubrick felt he needed to prove he could still make a low-budget feature. Stanley Kubrick will always be remembered for his cinematic style, but A Clockwork Orange employs perhaps the most boisterous and exquisite production design of any Kubrick film. In contrast with the custom-built set pieces of 2001, most of A Clockwork Orange was shot on location in metropolitan London, as Kubrick wanted to shoot the whole movie no more than an hour-and-a-half's drive from his home. Clockwork was shot on a $2 million budget, at just 1/6 the cost of producing 2001: A Space Odyssey. And while it's just as polished and complete as the rest of Kubrick's filmography, this lower budget shows in many of the design decisions that were made during production. For example, the exposed light bulbs as seen in the Kurova milk bar and the cat lady's house are used not only as a cost-effective way to practically light the set, but they create an unusual, futuristic look that's carried throughout the film as a visual throughline. Even the prison scenes feature these exposed bulbs hanging from their ceilings. Another way A Clockwork Orange creates a look of the future is in its costumes. Costume designer Milena Canonero says she designed all of the costumes in A Clockwork Orange to create a sort of surreal imagery. Alex and his droogs wear simple white outfits accented with black, their bowler hats, canes, and suspenders giving off a hint of ironic elegance, but the exposed codpieces and black boots connect them back with the brutalist spaces that they inhabit. Similarly, after Alex returns home from the Ludovico treatment, he finds his parents have thrown out his things and rented out his room to Joe, whose red sweater makes him absorb into the background of the room, in stark contrast to Alex's blue suit. In the world of A Clockwork Orange, sexual imagery is commonplace, and this frequent use of pop erotica gives the near future of A Clockwork Orange a drastically different look than the near future of 2001. The sexuality and rebellion of young people was a popular topic in the New Hollywood movement, and Kubrick embraced these trends in making A Clockwork Orange. The erotic art found throughout is made possible by the newly created MPAA rating system that replaced the Hays Production Code in 1968, and under this new system, A Clockwork Orange received an X rating upon its release. Filming took place between September of 1970 and April of 1971, making A Clockwork Orange the fastest shoot of Stanley Kubrick's career. It was released in December of 71 in the US and January of 72 in the UK, and was almost immediately met with controversy. The film received numerous awards and nominations, but this was largely overshadowed by harsh criticism. Critic Pauline Kael called it pornographic, noting that Alex's victims are dehumanized to highlight his own suffering, and going so far as to insult Kubrick himself, calling him Stanley Strangelove. But these unfavorable reviews would be the least of the controversy. In 1972, A Clockwork Orange was linked with several violent crimes in the UK. During the trial of a 14-year-old male accused of manslaughter, a prosecutor referred to A Clockwork Orange as having a macabre relevance to the case. In another case, which saw a 16-year-old on trial for murder, the defense told the court that the link between the crime and A Clockwork Orange's sensational literature was beyond a reasonable doubt. The film was also blamed in the rape of a teenage girl that took place in the UK in 1973, during which the assailants sang Singin' in the Rain during the attack. After receiving numerous death threats and having protests take place outside of his family home, Stanley Kubrick asked that Warner Bros. Remove A Clockwork Orange from circulation in the UK, and it remained out of circulation for the next 27 years. Despite seemingly giving in to public outcry, Stanley Kubrick has maintained that the film did not cause the violence. He said in an interview in 1972, "I don't think any work of art has any responsibility to be anything but a work of art." He goes on to say, "There is no positive evidence that violence in films or television causes societal violence. To focus one's interest on this aspect of violence is to ignore its principal causes." The debate surrounding whether or not violent media causes real-world violence is an outdated one, but the themes at the core of A Clockwork Orange are just as, if not more, relevant today. Mind control, government overreach, violent crime, fear of a delinquent youth. A Clockwork Orange asks us, is it better to be free to commit atrocities or not to be free at all? And leaves us with no answer. It's worth pointing out the irony of a man like Stanley Kubrick directing a film about authoritarianism. Kubrick was a notorious perfectionist and control freak. He had a reputation for being a director who put his art above all else, often subjecting his actors to harsh working conditions. He was notoriously brutal to Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining, verbally abusing her between takes to exact the performance he wanted out of her. On Eyes Wide Shut, he made his actors do dozens of takes of the same scene, a shoot that took so long it still holds the record for the longest film shoot ever. Malcolm McDowell suffered 2 scratched corneas during the filming of the Ludovico treatment, and later went on to describe his time working on A Clockwork Orange as hellish. Stanley Kubrick put his films before all else, often before even his actors, and the result is some of the greatest movies of all time, and I don't really know how to feel about that. Kubrick's movies never really seem to conclude. There's a sense that their stories continue on beyond their final scenes, that his films are far more grand than just the several hours runtime they each possess. There's a distinct feeling that the Vietnam War or the Star Child or the Overlook Hotel carry on and continue existing, even though we're not watching. Kubrick had a dedication to his craft that can be felt. In every perfect composition and every subtle music cue, there's this palpable dedication that draws me back to revisit his work time and time again. And it's this lasting quality in Kubrick's work that has kept it so relevant for so long. In the years since its self-imposed banning, A Clockwork Orange has gone on to be recognized as a cult classic. Today, we look back upon it as a landmark in the relaxation of the control of violence in cinema, alongside films like Bonnie and Clyde and Night of the Living Dead. After Kubrick's death in 1999, the film's banning in the UK was lifted, and in 2011 it was screened at Brunel University in West London, in the very same room in which it was filmed. In an interview with Rolling Stone in 1972, Kubrick says this: A Clockwork Orange operates on 2 levels. One is the psychological argument, the question of evil committed by the government in trying to change Alex's nature. It's an interesting one, but I don't think it's from this aspect that the story derives its uniqueness and power. More importantly, Alex represents natural man in the state in which he is born, unlimited, unrepressed. When Alex is given the Ludovico treatment, you can say this symbolizes the neurosis created by the conflict between the strictures imposed by our society and our own nature. We remember A Clockwork Orange for these dichotomies, a small-budget movie from a man who is a titan of filmmaking, a protagonist whose love of violence balances his love of classical music. In watching it, we feel repulsed by Alex's actions, and then equally repulsed by his punishment. Maybe more than any other Kubrick movie, A Clockwork Orange is emblematic of its time, yet manages to comment on both lasting societal issues and flaws in the human condition in a way that remains as relevant today as it was 50 years ago.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark up above, and the sun's in my heart